Hey everybody! So in this video I'm going to go over the PowerPoint on The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. So this is one of the short stories that you were asked to read last week and answer some questions about. And we're going to go through the story in a little more detail now. So what a crazy story, right? So I had to read A Rose for Emily and The Lottery in the same week. And both are just really horrible, horrible stories. I mean, artistically speaking, they're brilliant. But just, the plot and what happens in both of them is just horrible. So I'm sorry that I dumped both of those on you in the same week, but I was sort of following a theme. But let's go through all the elements of the story and then talk about the themes. So the first thing that we're going to look at is, of course, the structure of the story. And interestingly, there's nothing unexpected about the structure. There's a lot that's unexpected by the time we get to the end, but the structure itself actually follows a really traditional pattern. So we have our introduction or exposition in the beginning. That's where sort of like the stage is set, right? So that's the first 18 paragraphs of the story. It sets the scene. It provides a little bit of background information about the lottery, even though that information is limited to build suspense, but we do get mention of it. And we get a little bit of background information on it, but not what we want to know about it. We want to know what kind of lottery this is. What is all this about? We don't get that yet. But it sets the stage for us, those first 18 paragraphs. And then we have our rising action, right? Where the conflict starts to develop. That happens in the bulk of the story. Paragraphs 19 through 70 provide the rising action. So it is a really long, slow ascent to the top of this roller coaster hill. It's the longest section of the story. This is where the suspense is really built as the little slips of paper are drawn from the black box, because that's what a good chunk of that section consists of, is each male member of the family, each head of household coming up to draw. Then we have the climax. We finally reach the top. This is where, right, the big moment happens. And it's only paragraphs 71 through 72. Two small paragraphs. They're super short. But that is where Tessie's slip of paper has the black spot on it. She had the marked slip of paper. That's the climax. The falling action is where, we've hit that climax, and now we're starting our descent back down. And it's pretty short also. It's only paragraphs 73 through 78. And that's when everyone is quickly gathering their stones so they can conclude the lottery and get it over with and go back to their daily life. And then we have our denouement, which is sort of like the resolution, everything sort of tied up and the story ends. And that is the very last paragraph, paragraph 79, and it's literally like 2 sentences long, if that. And it's when the townspeople descend upon Tessie to stone her to death. So it doesn't really mess with a traditional plot pattern. Jackson follows that pretty much for the most part. What is a little different about it is how long she spends on the rising action compared to how short the climax, the falling action, and the denouement are. The rising action happens paragraphs 19 through 70, and the story ends in paragraph 79. Like, it's only 9 paragraphs for all the rest of it. The climax, the falling action, and the denouement. She really builds the suspense in this one. One other thing that she does with the structure is she uses a good bit of foreshadowing. If you remember, foreshadowing is something that is said or something that the narrator mentions, draws our attention to in some way, that seems insignificant in the moment, and then after the story's over, we realize that that seemingly insignificant detail was actually sort of a little preview of what's to come. I've used this example before, but let's just say that you have a story that ends in a very catastrophic, tragic house fire, you know, and then earlier in the story, two characters were having a conversation and one of them was smoking a cigarette, and for some reason, the narrator drew our attention to the smoke from the cigarette. At the time, we might have just thought that was just really descriptive writing, trying to help, build the imagery and allow us to envision the scene. But no, it was actually foreshadowing, because focusing on that smoke was sort of a little preview of how the story was going to end. So how does Jackson do that with the lottery? Well, it's those little small details in the first part of the story. The first one is all the children gathering stones. That doesn't seem like a big deal in the beginning. Kids do that, right? But it means something in this story. The fact that Tessie is late as the townspeople are gathering. They're about to start. She finally shows up. She forgot what day it was. She was just doing the dishes. And because she's late, our attention is drawn to her. And we don't realize until the end that Tessie's the one we should be watching. We don't get that until later. Mr. Summers even says to her when she arrives late, "Thought we were going to have to get on without you." And that's exactly what her family has to do when the lottery's over, because she dies. And then there's also this little moment where the Watson boy is asked if he's going to draw for his mother. He doesn't, because he's only 16, but the question is, why would he be drawing instead of his father? Because we've learned at this point that only the fathers, the men, the heads of household, draw from the box in the first round. So what is that? His father's not around, right? So it would seem that maybe his father was the winner of the previous year's lottery, right? Because it wouldn't have been something that happened a while ago, because otherwise they would have already known who was drawing for that family. So it seems like this is the first time where that question has had to be asked. Is the Watson boy drawing? And they're like, no, he's only 16. Okay. So that little disruption of the formality of the tradition is kind of a foreshadowing of what we learn later. That is very much a family thing, and what happens when someone wins the lottery. Alright, let's look at the point of view. Okay? We have a very objective narrator in this one. Third person. The narrator is very detached. They are not a character in the story. They do not have access to the townspeople's thoughts and emotions. And that allows the suspense to build, because we only get to see their words and actions. We don't get to know what they're thinking about as they're pretending to be perfectly normal and perfectly okay with what's happening. Inside, they're probably all just a nervous wreck. They're probably tense and anxious and ready to pee themselves, because they are terrified that their family will be the ones drawn and then one of their family members will die. On the surface, they're acting like everything is just perfectly normal. So because we don't have access to their thoughts and emotions, we are kept in the dark for as long as possible. what's really weird about the narrator too is the tone. You know, it is detached. It's a very calm tone. But what's crazy is the tone remains the same even when the normalcy of this town descends into absolute horror. That detached, calm tone remains the same. And it's a little unsettling, to say the least. When we look at the imagery from the story, uh, thinking about what we're told about the surroundings, the scene, the setting. The first paragraph tells us it's a beautiful summer day in Anytown, USA. Like, there's nothing distinctive about this region. It's just a town in America like any other town in America. Second paragraph kind of brings our attention to the innocence of children playing. It's going to be a stark contrast to what happens at the end of the story, and the fact that the children participate in what happens at the end of the story. The third paragraph is when the families gather and things seem perfectly normal. A good bit of imagery is also focused on the black box. So in the fourth paragraph is the first mention of the box as Mr. Summers arrives. In the fifth paragraph, we learn that the box is part of the tradition, but it's so worn and shabby, it's very noticeable that no one wants to upset the tradition by replacing the old box with a new one. The sixth paragraph, we learn that where the box is stored during the year, and to a certain extent, what gets put in the box. We're still not sure exactly what it even means, but we get a sense of what's going inside the box. And then a good chunk of the imagery is also on the lottery winner. Alright, so paragraph 74, the stones. Note that Mrs. Delacroix selected a stone so large she had to pick it up with both hands. Paragraph 75, Mrs. Dunbar had small stones in both hands. Paragraph 76, even the children have stones and pebbles. Paragraph 77, Tessie, quote, held her hand out desperately as the villagers moved in on her. A stone hit her on the side of the head. Paragraph 78, Old Man Warner is hurrying everyone up, right? He's wanting everyone to get this done with so they can go back to whatever they were all doing beforehand. Steve Adams and Mrs. Graves lead the crowd. Paragraph 79, the last paragraph, they descend upon her, right? She's saying, it isn't fair, it isn't right, Mrs. Hutchinson screamed, and then they were upon her. Why the sudden switch back to her married name, though? Why suddenly, there at the very end, refer to her as Mrs. Hutchinson again, when she'd been referred to as Tessie throughout almost the entire story? We know whose family she belongs to. We know she is a Hutchinson, but why suddenly start calling her that at the very end? That's very strange. Maybe we'll come back to that. So, a lot of the imagery calling attention to the setting, the black box, and what happens once the winner is revealed. That's where the imagery focuses our attention. Okay? Some of the motifs that we get. So these are repeated images. Going back to Mrs. Hutchinson versus Tessie, one of the motifs we get is family. A lot of attention is paid to family units. And they're all dispersed at first, the children and over there and the wives and the husbands, but as the lottery starts to, begin, each family comes together. And each family unit seems really strong, right? They are supportive and there for each other, and it seems like a very strong unit. Until the winner is revealed. And then children and husbands will turn on that mom like that. Neighbors. But even the strongest of family bonds does not hold up in the face of the lottery. It's kind of sad. A lot lot of attention, a lot of imagery, repeated details about the rules, right? So many rules about the lottery. It's held on the same day each year. Only the men are in charge of the lottery, and only specific men. There's a lot of rules involved, but yet a lot of the rules and the traditions have either just been voted out or just been forgotten. Like, they don't even remember all the details anymore. There's so much pomp and circumstance at the beginning of the lottery to get the whole thing started. And it's like they've forgotten other elements of the tradition, but starting it just right, that's super important for some reason. Only men, only the heads of household draw slips of paper in the first round, and if that man is unable to do so, if he's unable to be present, like the one man who had, I think, a broken leg, a grown son will draw. And if there are no grown sons, then the wife gets to draw. But that's only like as a last case scenario. The older generation helps to ensure that those rules and traditions persist. And you really have to ask yourself with these rules, why have some rules been dismissed but others remain? Why? I don't expect anyone to have an answer to that. I'm not sure there is an answer, but it's definitely a good question. Some of our symbolism in the story, the black box. The black box, it is the biggest symbol, right? It's fallen apart, but no one seems to be willing to use a new one or a different one. It has to be that one, no matter how much it looks like it's about to fall apart. The box represents the tradition, and that it should be left unchanged because they're so unwilling to mess with it. The box contains the family names. It used to be that they would be on wood chips, but now paper is used. So we have this box that nobody's willing to switch out for a new one because we have to do it the right way. It's tradition. But yet, other elements were perfectly fine with altering or leaving out altogether. Doesn't it make you start to wonder, like, why are you even doing this in the first place? Why do you even have this lottery in the first place when it makes no sense at all how you're letting some rules go and insisting on others stay? Where's the rhyme and reason? Where's the logic? The lottery itself is a symbol. So the name is obviously very important, the title. The lottery is a tradition that's being passed down through generations. We even have the saying in it, lottery in June, corn be heavy soon. No one questions it. Everyone is loyal to it. And it sounds really grand that everybody can unite on something like that, and there are no dissenters, and no one's trying to be disruptive and cause trouble. But at the same time, that blind loyalty results in murder. They kill one of their own, and they all take part in it. And then they just go back to life like nothing happened. Perhaps someone, probably from the younger generation, maybe someone should speak up. Maybe someone should stand up and cause a ruckus and refuse to follow the fold. I don't think that we're supposed to think that the black box or the lottery are positive symbols. Our setting and atmosphere, again, we kind of hinted at the setting. It's described there in the first few paragraphs. It is just a normal, average American town. It seems like, it could be anywhere. They're referencing corn, so that kind of limits it to certain regions of the United States, but still, it just seems like an average, normal town. And it's almost like this type of horror could happen anywhere. It's not just one specific location where something like this would be allowed to happen. This looks like a town just like any other town. Are we all susceptible to being like this town? Are we all guilty of something like this? The atmosphere that's created, it's sort of like the emotional tone. At first it seems very lovely. It's a very lovely summer day. But that detached tone from the narrator keeps us at a distance too. We start to hear about the black box. The suspense is built. The first round of the lottery draw deepens that suspense. Um, and then Tessie has the spot, the paper with the spot, and she starts to protest it. And then we start to shift from suspense to fear. Then the final paragraph makes the final shift. We go quickly from fear to shock and horror. Right? But the point of view of the narrator and the tone remain the same. So, but that's why that shift happens so quickly and doesn't last for very long, because they've kept us so detached and built the suspense so much. So that atmosphere is very important. So that leads us to the themes. What is this story all about? What message are we supposed to get from it? Well, we're looking at the structure, especially that point of view and the imagery and symbolism and the setting, but it's just like any average town. The themes start to come out. One theme is family, right? Family bonds. Family seems to be very important in this town, but those family ties are especially important on Lottery Day. Because now it's not just a matter of emotional bonds, they become of social importance, right? Who's the head of the family? Who is in the family? Does this daughter belong with this family? Or, oh, she's married now, so she belongs with this family, right? So it's a very weird shift, those family bonds. And during the lottery, the emotional bonds are placed on hold. It's not just the other townspeople who throw the stones. The winner's family members do as well. And they have to. They're forced to. And most of them don't think twice about it. So those really tight, strong family bonds that are there every other day of the year, they don't mean jack crap on Lottery Day. The tradition is too important. Family structure is obviously super important too, right? That's all about, the lottery is all about authority and tradition, and it is seriously messed up. The family structure is also about authority and tradition. So is that equally messed up? Is that what we're supposed to get from this? That, there's so much authority and tradition involved in the lottery itself, which we know right away as soon as we finish reading it that we were supposed to think that it was a god-awful tradition, right? Is the family structure, which is also about authority and tradition, men being the head of the household, even if the man's not available, the woman still doesn't get first dibs at being the authority figure or the person in power. It would go to a son. Is that equally messed up? Then our last theme, our second theme, is about tradition. It seems to be a very important tradition, but does anyone really know why it's important? No one really knows when it began. No one really knows if or when it will ever end. And not knowing makes the tradition more powerful. No one even thinks to question or defy it. Right? It's just such a part of the fabric of their town, of their lives, of their history. And despite knowing how the lottery is going to end each year, these otherwise normal people remain willing to participate in murder rather than question the tradition. It's crazy, because that's how it's always been done, and everyone just accepts it. So can we draw any parallels with any of our own national or cultural or societal or family traditions? Are there things that groups of us willingly participate in, willingly go along with, simply because that's the way it's been done, and no one thinks to question if it's right, or even just if it could be done better, even if it's not something horrible like this lottery? Is it good to blindly follow tradition and authority just because it's tradition? should we question? We should always question. Clearly, we're not supposed to go along with any of it. And that while we may not participate in anything on such a horrific scale like this lottery, are there other things that we should perhaps examine about our lives? Probably. So, that is The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. If you have any questions, or want to follow up with me on anything, by all means do so. Don't forget that all of this information is going to come in very handy when you do the short stories exam in week 10. So come back to this. Otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed the story, as bizarre as it is and horrible as it is. It's really a cool story at the end of the day. So I hope you guys liked it. Otherwise, you guys are free to move on.